The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Afghan mountains as Lieutenant Sarah Martinez adjusted her position behind the weathered boulder. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly under her tactical helmet, and her keen brown eyes scanned the valley below through her scope. At 28, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most precise marksmen in the Navy SEALs, though few people outside her unit knew her true capabilities. Sarah had grown up in a small Texas town where her father, a former Marine, had taught her to shoot when she was just 12 years old. What started as weekend trips to the local range had evolved into something extraordinary. By the time she graduated high school, she could hit a target at distances that impressed even seasoned military veterans. Her natural talent, combined with an unwavering determination to serve her country, had led her through the grueling SEAL training program where she became one of the first women to complete the course. The mission today was supposed to be routine surveillance. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target would be moving through this particular valley, and Sarah's team had been positioned here for 3 days, waiting and watching. The landscape was unforgiving, with jagged rocks and sparse vegetation providing minimal cover. The heat during the day was oppressive, and the nights brought a bone-chilling cold that tested even the most experienced soldiers. Sarah's team consisted of 4 other SEALs, each specialists in their own right. There was Jackson, the communications expert whose calm demeanor under pressure had saved their lives on more than one occasion. Rodriguez served as their medic and explosive specialist, his quick thinking and steady hands proving invaluable in tight situations. Thompson was their intelligence analyst, able to read terrain and enemy movements like others read books. Finally, there was their team leader, Commander Walsh, a veteran with over 15 years of experience who had handpicked Sarah for this mission. The radio crackled softly in Sarah's earpiece as Walsh's voice came through. "Overwatch, this is base. Any movement in Sector 7? Sarah shifted slightly, adjusting her scope to scan the designated area. "Negative base, all quiet on the eastern approach." The waiting was always the hardest part of these missions. Hours could pass without any significant activity, requiring intense focus and patience that tested even the most disciplined soldiers. As the day wore on, Sarah noticed movement in the distance. A small convoy of vehicles was making its way up the winding mountain road, dust clouds marking their progress. She counted 3 vehicles total, 2 pickup trucks and what appeared to be a modified military transport. Through her scope, she could see armed figures in the truck beds, their weapons clearly visible even at this distance. "Base, this is Overwatch. I have eyes on potential targets. 3 vehicles approaching from the southwest. Estimate 15 to 20 personnel." Walsh's response was immediate. "Copy that, Overwatch. Maintain observation and report any changes." Sarah watched as the convoy came to a stop approximately 800 meters from her position. The vehicles formed a defensive circle, and the occupants began setting up what appeared to be a temporary camp. Among the figures moving around the vehicles, Sarah noticed something unusual. There was a group of individuals who didn't appear to be local militia or insurgents. Their equipment was different, more sophisticated, and their movements suggested military training. As she observed them more closely, she realized they were speaking English. Not just any English, but the crisp, clipped accents that could only belong to British military personnel. One figure in particular caught her attention. A tall man with sandy hair and what appeared to be sniper equipment was setting up a position on a small ridge overlooking the valley. Even from her distant vantage point, Sarah could tell he was skilled by the way he moved and positioned his gear. She adjusted her scope for a better view and noticed the distinctive patch on his uniform that identified him as a member of the British Special Air Service. The presence of British forces in this area was unexpected and immediately raised questions about the nature of their mission. Sarah knew that various international special forces units operated in Afghanistan, but coordination was usually much better than this. The fact that her team hadn't been briefed about other friendly forces in the area suggested that something wasn't going according to plan. As she continued her observation, the British sniper seemed to sense he was being watched. He began scanning the surrounding terrain with his own scope, methodically checking each potential hiding spot and vantage point. Sarah remained perfectly still, knowing that even the slightest movement could give away her position. Her training had taught her that patience and discipline were just as important as marksmanship when it came to staying alive in situations like this. The afternoon heat continued to build, creating shimmering mirages that distorted the landscape and made accurate observation more challenging. Sarah had to constantly adjust her focus and compensate for the atmospheric conditions that could affect both vision and bullet trajectory. She sipped carefully from her water tube, maintaining hydration while never taking her eyes off the scene below. The British team appeared to be setting up for an extended stay. They had established a perimeter, assigned watch rotations, and even set up what looked like a communication array. Whatever their mission, it was clearly important enough to warrant a significant investment of time and resources. Sarah noticed that they were being particularly careful about their positioning, suggesting they were either expecting trouble or preparing to cause it. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting longer shadows across the mountainous terrain, Sarah's attention was drawn to increased activity around the British position. The sniper she had been observing was now actively scanning the area with his scope, and his body language suggested he had spotted something of interest. Following his line of sight, Sarah adjusted her own scope to see what had captured his attention. In the distance, barely visible even with her high-powered optics, Sarah could make out another group moving along a ridgeline approximately 1,200 meters away. The figures were moving with the careful, deliberate pace of trained soldiers, but something about their equipment and formation suggested they weren't friendly forces. Sarah realized that the British team might be facing the same situation her own team was, waiting for a target that was now approaching from an unexpected direction. The tension in the valley was palpable, even from Sarah's distant observation point. She could sense that multiple forces were converging on this location, and the potential for conflict was increasing by the minute. Her finger moved instinctively to the safety of her rifle, though she knew that engaging targets at this range would immediately compromise her team's position and mission. Through her earpiece, she heard Walsh's voice requesting an update. "Overwatch, report current situation." Sarah took a moment to organize her observations before responding. "Base, we have British SAS team approximately 800 meters southwest, appears to be setting up for long-term observation or engagement. Additional unknown force observed moving along Eastern Ridge, approximately 1,200 meters out, situation becoming complex." Walsh's response carried a note of concern. "Copy that, Overwatch. Continue observation, but do not engage unless directly threatened. We need to determine the nature of all forces in the area before taking any action." Sarah acknowledged the order while keeping her scope trained on the developing situation. The military precision required in these moments was what separated elite forces from regular troops, and Sarah knew that her next few decisions could determine the success or failure of their mission. The British sniper had now locked onto the same target that Sarah was observing on the eastern ridge. She could see him making minute adjustments to his scope and rifle position, preparing for what appeared to be an imminent engagement. The distance was extreme, even for a skilled marksman, and the environmental conditions would make any shot extremely challenging. The British sniper had been tracking the movement on the eastern ridge for several minutes when he noticed something that made him pause. Through his scope, he could see what appeared to be another sniper positioned among the rocks, and this person seemed to be observing his team's position with considerable skill. The way this figure moved and positioned their equipment suggested advanced training, but the distance made positive identification impossible. Captain James Morrison had been with the SAS for 8 years and had earned a reputation as one of their most capable long-range specialists. He had served in Iraq, Syria, and now Afghanistan, accumulating an impressive record of successful missions and confirmed eliminations. His confidence in his abilities was well-founded, having consistently outperformed his peers in training and operational scenarios. The current mission was particularly important, as his team was tasked with eliminating a high-value target who had been responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces. As Morrison continued his observation, he became increasingly intrigued by the distant figure on the eastern ridge. The person's positioning and equipment suggested they were also military, but their identity and intentions remained unclear. In the complex environment of Afghanistan, where multiple international forces operated with varying degrees of coordination, it was not uncommon to encounter friendly forces without prior notification. However, the tactical situation required that Morrison treat any unknown personnel as potentially hostile until their status could be confirmed. Morrison activated his radio and contacted his team leader. "Base, this is Eagle Eye. I have a possible sniper position on the eastern ridge, approximately 1,200 meters out. Cannot confirm identity or intentions at this time." The response came back immediately. "Copy that, Eagle Eye. Maintain observation, but do not engage without positive threat identification. We cannot afford any blue-on-blue incidents." The afternoon sun continued its relentless assault on the mountainous terrain, creating challenging conditions for precision shooting. Morrison had to account for temperature variations, wind patterns, and atmospheric distortion when calculating potential shots. His training had prepared him for these conditions, but the extreme range involved would test even his considerable skills. The target on the eastern ridge remained motionless, suggesting that whoever it was possessed significant patience and discipline. Through his high-powered scope, Morrison began to notice details about the distant figure that piqued his interest. The equipment appeared to be American military standard, and the positioning suggested someone with advanced sniper training. The possibility that he was observing a U.S. Special Forces operative began to form in his mind, which would explain both the skill level and the sophisticated equipment he was seeing. Morrison's radio crackled with an update from his intelligence specialist. "Eagle Eye, we have confirmation that U.S. forces are operating in this general area, but no specific coordination details were provided in our briefing. Recommend extreme caution in any engagement decisions." This information both clarified and complicated the situation. If the figure on the eastern ridge was indeed American military, any hostile action would create a serious international incident and potentially compromise both missions. The British sniper made a decision that would later prove to be significant. Instead of maintaining silent observation, he activated his communication system and attempted to establish contact with the unknown sniper. Using standard military frequencies, he transmitted a carefully worded message. "Unknown sniper on Eastern Ridge. This is British forces. Please identify yourself and your mission to avoid any misunderstandings." Sarah heard the transmission through her radio system and immediately recognized the professional military protocol in the message. The British sniper was attempting to establish communication, which suggested he was following proper rules of engagement and seeking to avoid conflict. She looked to Commander Walsh for guidance on how to respond to this unexpected development. Walsh made a quick decision based on the tactical situation and the potential for friendly fire incidents. "Overwatch, respond to the British transmission, but provide minimal information about our mission. Confirm friendly status, but maintain operational security." Sarah activated her radio and transmitted her response. "British forces, this is U.S. Navy operating in the area. We are conducting surveillance operations and do not intend to interfere with your mission." Morrison received the transmission and felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. The voice was clearly American, and the professional tone suggested legitimate military personnel. However, something about the voice caught his attention. It was distinctly female, which was unusual but not unprecedented in modern special forces operations. His interest was further piqued by the mention of U.S. Navy, which could indicate a SEAL team operating in the area. The British sniper decided to test the skills of his American counterpart with what he considered a friendly challenge. His competitive nature, combined with the testosterone-driven culture of special forces, led him to make a comment that he believed would be taken in good humor. He activated his radio again and transmitted a message that would prove to be a significant miscalculation. "Well, well, American Navy. I see you've got yourself a nice little position there. Tell me, sailor, can you actually hit anything from that range, or are you just playing dress-up?" Morrison's tone carried what he intended to be playful mockery, the kind of inter-service rivalry banter that was common among military personnel. However, his words carried an undertone of condescension that he was not fully aware of. Sarah felt her jaw tighten as she heard the transmission. The British sniper's comment was clearly intended to provoke a response, and his dismissive tone suggested he didn't take her seriously as a threat. She had encountered this kind of attitude before, both in training and in operational environments, where male soldiers assumed that female personnel were less capable or experienced. The comment about playing dress-up was particularly grating, as it suggested he viewed her presence as some kind of charade. Commander Walsh could see Sarah's reaction to the British sniper's comment, and he knew his team member well enough to recognize that her competitive instincts had been activated. Sarah's marksmanship abilities were legendary within the SEAL community, and Walsh had seen her outperform male snipers on numerous occasions. He also knew that she didn't respond well to challenges or perceived slights, especially those that seemed to question her competence based on her gender. Overwatch, maintain professional demeanor, and do not allow personal feelings to compromise the mission, Walsh advised through the team's internal communication system. However, he also understood that sometimes the best way to diffuse a potentially tense situation was to demonstrate capability rather than engage in verbal sparring. The British sniper's challenge had created an opportunity to establish respect and credibility that might prove valuable if their missions required coordination. Sarah took a deep breath and considered her options. She could ignore the provocation and maintain silent observation, which would be the safest course of action from an operational standpoint. Alternatively, she could respond to the challenge in a way that would demonstrate her capabilities while potentially establishing a more respectful relationship with the British team. The decision she made would set the tone for any future interactions between the two forces. Morrison continued his observation of the American position while waiting for a response to his challenge. He was genuinely curious about the capabilities of the U.S. sniper, particularly given the extreme range involved and the challenging environmental conditions. In his experience, very few snipers could consistently hit targets at distances exceeding 1,000 meters, and even fewer could do so under the current atmospheric conditions. The British sniper began scanning the area for potential targets that could serve as a demonstration of marksmanship. Approximately 1,500 meters from both positions, there was an abandoned vehicle that had been left by previous military operations. The vehicle would provide a challenging but achievable target for a skilled marksman, particularly given the wind conditions and temperature variations affecting bullet trajectory. Morrison activated his radio again and made what he considered a sporting proposal. "American sniper, I see that old truck down in the valley. What do you say we have a little competition? See who can put a round closest to the driver's side door. Winner gets bragging rights, and maybe we can establish who really knows how to shoot in this neighborhood." His tone had shifted from mockery to what he intended as friendly competition, though the underlying assumption remained that he would emerge victorious. Sarah studied the target Morrison had identified and quickly calculated the various factors that would affect a shot at that range. Wind speed and direction, temperature gradients, barometric pressure, and the Coriolis effect all had to be considered when attempting precision shots at extreme distances. The target was certainly achievable, but it would require perfect technique and a thorough understanding of environmental ballistics. Through her scope, Sarah could see Morrison adjusting his rifle and preparing for what appeared to be an immediate shot attempt. His confidence was evident in his body language, and he seemed to be treating the challenge as more of a demonstration than a serious competition. This attitude would prove to be his first significant mistake in what was about to become a very humbling experience. Sarah made her decision with the calm precision that had earned her the respect of her SEAL teammates. She activated her radio and responded to Morrison's challenge with a voice that carried quiet confidence. "British sniper, I accept your proposal. However, let me suggest we make this more interesting. That truck is child's play for someone with real skills. See that communications antenna on the hill behind the truck? The one that's approximately 1,800 meters out? Let's see if you're capable of hitting something that actually requires precision." Morrison looked through his scope toward the location Sarah had indicated and felt a moment of uncertainty. The communications antenna was indeed visible, but hitting it would require a shot that pushed the boundaries of even advanced sniper capabilities. The target was not only extremely distant, but also narrow, requiring pinpoint accuracy that left virtually no margin for error. He began to realize that the American sniper might be more skilled than he had initially assumed. 1,800 meters, Morrison responded, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "That's quite ambitious for someone I haven't seen demonstrate their capabilities. Are you certain you want to attempt something that difficult? I wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself in front of your team." Despite his words of caution, Morrison was already beginning calculations for the shot, his competitive nature preventing him from backing down from the challenge. Sarah smiled grimly as she heard the doubt creeping into the British sniper's voice. She had been making shots at similar ranges since her advanced training, and the specific conditions today actually favored her particular shooting style and equipment setup. Her custom rifle had been precision-tuned for extreme long-range engagements, and she had spent countless hours mastering the complex ballistic calculations required for such distances. "Tell you what," Sarah transmitted, her voice carrying a tone of casual confidence that made Morrison's stomach tighten with unease. "Why don't you take your shot first? I'll observe your technique and see if there's anything I can learn from someone with your obvious experience." The subtle sarcasm in her voice was unmistakable, and Morrison realized that his earlier condescending comments had definitely struck a nerve. Morrison began his shot preparation with methodical precision, but Sarah could observe through her scope that his technique, while competent, showed several subtle flaws that would affect accuracy at extreme range. His breathing rhythm was slightly irregular, his trigger control was marginally jerky, and his environmental calculations appeared to underestimate the wind gradient effects at different altitudes between his position and the target. The British sniper took nearly 3 minutes to line up his shot, making multiple adjustments to his scope and position. When he finally squeezed the trigger, the crack of his rifle echoed across the valley, and both snipers watched through their scopes as the bullet struck approximately 2 meters to the left and 1 meter low of the intended target. It was a respectable shot for the range and conditions, but clearly not the precision demonstration Morrison had hoped to deliver. "Decent attempt," Sarah transmitted, her voice professionally neutral. "The wind gradient calculation was a bit off, and you didn't fully compensate for the temperature inversion layer at about 1,000 meters. Watch and learn." Her confidence was no longer subtle, and Morrison found himself genuinely curious about whether the American sniper could back up her bold words with actual performance. Sarah's shot preparation was a masterclass in precision marksmanship. She spent nearly 5 minutes calculating environmental factors, making microscopic adjustments to her scope, and regulating her breathing to achieve perfect physiological control. Morrison watched through his own scope, grudgingly impressed by the thoroughness and professionalism of her preparation routine. When Sarah finally took her shot, Morrison was watching the target through his scope and saw something that made him question his own eyes. The bullet struck the communications antenna dead center, severing it cleanly and causing the upper portion to topple over. The precision was absolutely perfect, demonstrating a level of marksmanship skill that Morrison had rarely witnessed, even among the most elite snipers he had worked with. "Impossible," Morrison muttered under his breath, then activated his radio. That was an exceptional shot. I have to admit, I wasn't expecting that level of precision. His tone had completely changed from mockery to genuine respect, and for the first time since the exchange began, he was starting to understand that he might have seriously underestimated his American counterpart. Sarah's response came back immediately, and this time her voice carried a hint of amusement. "Thank you for the acknowledgement. Now, would you like to try for the secondary antenna? It's about 200 meters further out, and there's a nice crosswind that should make things more challenging, unless, of course, you're not feeling up to it after that demonstration." Morrison stared through his scope at the second antenna Sarah had indicated and realized that attempting that shot would be beyond his current capabilities under these conditions. The first shot had been at the edge of his effective range, and adding another 200 meters along with increased wind effects would make success highly unlikely. More importantly, he was beginning to understand that he was dealing with someone whose skills significantly exceeded his own. "I think I'll pass on that particular challenge," Morrison transmitted, his voice carrying a newfound humility. "I'm curious, though. What's your background? That shooting was, well, it was extraordinary. I've worked with some of the best marksmen in the British military, and I've never seen precision like that at extreme range." Sarah considered how much information she should reveal about her background and training. Military operational security protocols generally discourage sharing detailed personal information, but the tactical situation had evolved to the point where establishing credibility and mutual respect might prove valuable for both teams' missions. "I've been doing this for a while," Sarah responded diplomatically. "Let's just say that the U.S. Navy takes marksmanship training very seriously. And I've been fortunate enough to work with some excellent instructors. I imagine your own training has been quite comprehensive as well. That was actually a very good shot for the conditions, even if it wasn't perfect." Morrison found himself genuinely impressed not only by Sarah's shooting ability, but also by her professionalism in victory. Rather than gloating or making disparaging comments about his performance, she had chosen to offer respectful acknowledgement of his attempt while demonstrating clear superiority. This level of tactical diplomacy suggested someone with significant operational experience and leadership training. "I have to ask," Morrison transmitted, his curiosity overcoming his bruised ego. "How long have you been with naval special warfare? Because that level of precision shooting doesn't develop overnight. And I'm trying to understand how I managed to so completely misjudge your capabilities." Sarah glanced at Commander Walsh, who nodded his approval for her to share basic professional information. "I've been with my current unit for about 4 years now, but I've been shooting competitively since I was 12. Sometimes natural talent combines with good training and lots of practice. The important thing is that we've established communication and mutual respect. Now we can focus on our respective missions without worrying about friendly fire incidents." The exchange had indeed achieved something valuable beyond the simple demonstration of marksmanship skills. Both teams now understood that they were dealing with highly professional, competent forces, which would facilitate any future coordination that might become necessary. Morrison's initial assumption about American capabilities had been thoroughly corrected, and he found himself genuinely curious about working alongside such skilled operators. "Agreed," Morrison responded, "and I owe you an apology for my earlier comments. They were unprofessional and based on assumptions that were clearly incorrect. I hope we have the opportunity to work together on future operations, because I'd be very interested to learn from someone with your level of expertise." Sarah accepted the apology graciously while maintaining focus on the tactical situation. The original mission objectives for both teams remained unchanged, and the afternoon was advancing toward evening when visibility conditions would become more challenging. both snipers returned their attention to their assigned surveillance sectors. But the dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted from potential antagonism to mutual professional respect. As the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains, painting the rocky terrain in shades of orange and purple, both Sarah and Morrison continued their respective missions with a new understanding of the caliber of forces operating in their area. The brief competition had served multiple purposes. It had prevented a potential misunderstanding between Allied forces, established clear communication protocols, and demonstrated that excellence in military operations could be found in unexpected places. Commander Walsh observed the entire exchange with satisfaction, knowing that his sniper had not only maintained operational security, but had also established valuable relationships that might prove crucial in future missions. Sarah had demonstrated exactly the kind of professional competence and tactical diplomacy that made her such a valuable asset to the SEAL community. The lesson for Morrison was clear and humbling. His assumptions about gender, nationality, and relative capabilities had been thoroughly demolished by someone who had simply allowed her actions to speak louder than any words could have. As darkness began to fall over the mountainous terrain, both snipers settled in for what promised to be a long night of continued surveillance. But now they did so with the knowledge that they had allies watching their backs, rather than potential threats to worry about.